The dust kicked up around Adelaide Norton's worn boots as she knelt beside the two ragged children huddled against the wooden storefront, their faces smudged with dirt and hollow with hunger. She broke her last piece of bread in half, then in half again, offering the larger portions to the children while keeping barely a morsel for herself, unaware that a pair of gray eyes watched her from across the dusty main street of Challies, Idaho. Mason Garrett had just ridden into town that morning in 1882, his saddlebags heavy with the earnings from a successful cattle drive. He had been heading toward the saloon to wash the trail dust from his throat when he noticed the woman in the faded calico dress, her movements so gentle and deliberate as she pressed the bread into small, grateful hands. What struck him most was not just her generosity, but the visible trembling in her own hands, the gauntness of her cheeks that spoke of her own desperate need for that very food she was giving away. Mason watched as she smiled at the children, a smile that reached her hazel eyes despite the obvious exhaustion etched into her features. She could not have been more than 22 or 23, he estimated, close to his own 26 years, yet life had clearly dealt her a harsh hand. Her dress, though clean and carefully mended, had seen better days, and her boots were so worn that he could see where she had stuffed paper into the soles to keep her feet from the ground. After the children scampered away, Adelaide stood slowly, swaying slightly on her feet. She steadied herself against the building, taking a deep breath before straightening her shoulders with a determination that Mason found himself admiring. She started walking down the street, her steps measured and careful, heading toward what looked like a small boarding house at the edge of town. Mason found himself following at a distance, his curiosity overriding his initial plan for a drink. He watched as she entered through a side door, and he made his way to the front entrance. The proprietor, a stout woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper expression, stood behind a small desk. "Help you?" the woman asked curtly. "I am looking for a place to stable my horse and perhaps get a room for a few nights," Mason replied, removing his hat politely. $2 a night, meals extra," the woman said. "Name is Mrs. Thornton. You pay in advance." As Mason counted out the money, he heard footsteps on the stairs. Adelaide appeared, now wearing a different dress, equally worn but clearly her work attire. She had tied her dark blonde hair back severely, and she moved with purpose despite her obvious fatigue. "Adelaide, you are late, Mrs. Thornton snapped. "The floors will not scrub themselves." "Yes, madam, I apologize," Adelaide said softly, her voice carrying a gentle warmth despite the exhaustion. "I will start right away." Mason watched as she disappeared down a hallway, and Mrs. Thornton caught his gaze. "Something else." "That young woman, she works here, works off her room and board. Not that it is any concern of yours, mister. Your room is number 7, top of the stairs." Mrs. Thornton thrust a key at him. Mason took his belongings upstairs, but his mind remained on the woman who gave away her last food. He had seen plenty of suffering in his travels across the territories. He had witnessed greed and cruelty, had seen men kill each other over cards or cattle or pride. But genuine selflessness, the kind that cost the giver everything, that was rare as gold in these hard lands. He cleaned himself up and changed into fresh clothes before heading back downstairs. Adelaide was on her hands and knees in the dining room, scrubbing the wooden floor with a brush that had seen better days. A bucket of murky water sat beside her, and her movements were methodical but slow, as though every motion required more energy than she had to give. "Excuse me, miss," Mason said gently, not wanting to startle her. Adelaide looked up, surprised. Up close, he could see the fine features of her face, the intelligence in her eyes, and something else, a deep sadness that she tried to hide behind her polite expression. "Yes, sir. Do you need something? She started to rise, but Mason held up his hand. Please do not get up on my account. I was wondering if you might direct me to a good place to get a meal in town. The restaurant next door serves decent food, Adelaide said, gesturing toward the wall. They have a special on Tuesdays, beef stew and bread for 25 cents. And what about you? Have you eaten today? The question seemed to catch her off guard. A faint blush colored her pale cheeks. I am fine, sir. Thank you for your concern. I saw you earlier, Mason said, kneeling down so they were at eye level, giving your bread to those children. Adelaide's eyes widened slightly, then she looked down at her bucket. They were hungry. So are you. I will manage, I always do. There was no self-pity in her voice, just a simple statement of fact. Mason made a decision in that moment, one that would change both their lives forever, though neither knew it yet. Would you do me the honor of joining me for supper tonight? I find eating alone in a new town rather lonely. Adelaide looked at him with surprise and something like suspicion. Sir, I do not even know your name and I have work to finish. Mason Garrett, and I will speak to Mrs. Thornton about your work. Surely she can spare you for an hour. She does not spare me anything, Mr. Garrett. I work for my keep, and if I do not finish my tasks, I do not sleep under her roof. The matter-of-fact way she said it made Mason's jaw tighten. Then I will pay her for your time. I am not for sale, Mr. Garrett. There was steel in her voice now, despite her weakness. That is not what I meant, and I apologize if I offended you. I simply meant that I would compensate her for the work you would miss. Please, Miss Norton, Adelaide Norton. She studied his face for a long moment, and whatever she saw there must have reassured her because she nodded slowly. If you can square it with Mrs. Thornton, I will join you, but I pay for my own meal. We will discuss that later, Mason said, standing and offering her his hand. She hesitated before taking it, and as he helped her to her feet, he felt how light she was, how fragile. This close, he could smell the lye soap she had been using, and underneath it, a faint scent of lavender that must have come from whatever she used to wash her hair. Mrs. Thornton was not pleased with the arrangement, but Mason's offer of $5 smoothed her ruffled feathers considerably. Adelaide was given leave to clean herself up, and 20 minutes later, she descended the stairs wearing the same dress she had worn earlier, but with her hair down around her shoulders, falling in soft waves that caught the late afternoon light streaming through the windows. The restaurant next door was simple but clean, with checkered tablecloths and the smell of home cooking filling the air. The owner, a friendly man named Mr. Chen who had come from San Francisco, greeted them warmly and showed them to a table by the window. Adelaide sat stiffly at first, her hands folded in her lap, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Mason ordered the stew special for both of them, along with fresh bread and coffee, ignoring her protest that she could not afford it. Consider it payment for your company, Mason said gently. A fair trade. When the food arrived, Mason watched as Adelaide stared at the generous bowl of stew, the thick slices of bread, the steam rising in fragrant curls. Her hands trembled as she picked up her spoon, and he pretended not to notice as she closed her eyes briefly, as if in prayer or perhaps to hold back tears. She ate slowly, with deliberate control, though he could tell she wanted to devour the food. It spoke to her character, he thought, that even in her hunger she maintained her dignity and composure. "How long have you been in Challies?" Mason asked after they had both made good progress on their meals. "Nearly a year now," Adelaide replied, setting down her spoon. "I came here after my father died. He had a small farm east of here, but when he passed, the bank took it for debts I did not even know existed. You have no other family. My mother died when I was young. I had a brother, but he went to California 5 years ago looking for gold." I have not heard from him since." She took a sip of her coffee, and he saw her savor it like it was the finest thing she had ever tasted. "What about you, Mr. Garrett? What brings you to Challies?" "I just finished a cattle drive from Texas up to Montana." Challies seemed like a good place to rest for a while before heading back down for another drive. "And please, call me Mason." "Then you must call me Adelaide." They talked as they ate, the conversation flowing more easily as Adelaide relaxed. Mason learned that she had been a schoolteacher before her father died, that she loved reading though she rarely had access to books anymore, and that she had a quiet sense of humor that surfaced in unexpected moments. She asked him about his travels, listening with genuine interest as he described the wide open ranges, the star-filled nights on the trail, the challenges and rewards of the cowboy life. When they finished eating, Adelaide insisted on paying, but Mason refused. "I invited you and I pay." "That is how it works." "You have already been too generous," Adelaide protested. "It was just a meal, Adelaide, and besides it was the best company I have had in months. That is worth far more than a bowl of stew." As they walked back to the boarding house in the gathering dusk, Adelaide stopped and turned to face him. "Why did you do this, really? You do not know me. For all you know, I could be a terrible person." Mason smiled. "A terrible person does not give away her last food to hungry children. And as for why, I suppose I saw someone who needed a kindness, and I was in a position to provide one." "Is that so strange?" "In my experience, yes," Adelaide said quietly. "Most people look out for themselves first. I have learned that the hard way." "Then perhaps it is time for your experience to change." Over the next few days, Mason made it his business to be around the boarding house during Adelaide's scarce free moments. He would arrive in the morning with fresh pastries from the bakery, insisting he had bought too many and needed help eating them. He would happen to be in the parlor reading a newspaper when she finished her evening chores, and they would talk about the news, about books, about nothing and everything. Mrs. Thornton watched this development with a calculating eye, but as long as Mason paid his rent and caused no trouble, she kept her opinions to herself, though her expression spoke volumes. On his 5th day in Challies, Mason was in the general store purchasing supplies when he overheard 2 women gossiping near the fabric section. "That Norton girl, working herself to the bone for that which Thornton," one woman said, her voice carrying despite her attempt at discretion. "It is a shame what happened to her father's farm. I heard she tried to get teaching work, but the school board said they wanted someone more established, someone with references," the other woman replied. As if teaching those children for 2 years before her father died was not reference enough. "Well, you know how it is. A young woman alone, no family, no prospects. People talk. They say she must have done something to lose that farm so quickly." Mason's hands tightened on the bag of coffee beans he was holding. He moved closer, making his presence known, and the women had the grace to look embarrassed before hurrying away. The storekeeper, an older man named Mr. Patterson, shook his head. "Do not mind them. Adelaide Norton is a good girl, always has been. Life just dealt her a bad hand. Her father was a dreamer, always investing in schemes that went nowhere. When he died, the debts came out of the woodwork like termites. She lost everything before she even understood what was happening." "The school board really will not hire her?" Mason asked. "They hired the nephew of one of the board members instead, a fellow from back east who had never taught a day in his life. But he is a man and he has connections, so there you have it." Mr. Patterson rang up Mason's purchases. "You seem to have taken an interest in her welfare. Is that a problem?" "Not for me, son. Just be aware that people are already talking. A single cowboy and a single woman spending time together, well, you know how folks are." They have nothing better to do than speculate about other people's business. Mason paid for his goods and left the store, but Mr. Patterson's words stayed with him. He had been in Challies nearly a week, and he had not given much thought to what came next. He had money saved up, enough to last through the winter if he was careful. The cattle drive season would not start up again until spring. He could go back to Texas, find work on a ranch, or he could stay here in Idaho. The decision seemed to make itself. That evening he found Adelaide in the small kitchen behind the boarding house, preparing vegetables for the next day's meals. Her sleeves were rolled up, her hair tied back, and she was humming softly to herself, a melody that sounded like an old hymn. "Adelaide, might I speak with you for a moment?" She looked up, surprised but pleased to see him. "Of course. Let me just finish these carrots." "I will help," Mason said, rolling up his own sleeves and picking up a knife. They worked in companionable silence for a few minutes before Mason spoke. "I have been thinking about staying in Challies for a while, through the winter at least." Adelaide's hands stilled. "Oh, I thought you said you usually go back to Texas between drives." "Usually, yes, but I am finding Idaho has its appeals." He set down the carrot he was peeling and turned to face her. "Adelaide, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. If you had the means to leave here to do something different, would you?" She considered the question carefully. "I do not know. This is my home, or at least Idaho is. My parents are buried here. My memories are here. But working for Mrs. Thornton, living like this, it is not what I imagined for my life." She met his eyes. "Why do you ask?" "Because I have a proposal for you, and I want you to hear me out before you say no." Adelaide set down her own knife, wariness creeping into her expression. "What kind of proposal?" "I have been doing some thinking and some asking around. There is a ranch about 10 miles outside of town that is looking for a couple to manage it. The owners, the Hendersons, are getting older and want to spend winters in Boise with their daughter. They need someone to look after the place, tend the animals, keep things running. It is not fancy, but it comes with a house, food, and a salary." "That sounds wonderful for whoever gets the position," Adelaide said slowly, "but I do not see what that has to do with me." Mason took a breath. "They want a married couple, someone stable, someone who will stay and treat the place like their own. And I thought perhaps you and I could apply together." Adelaide stared at him, her face going pale. "You cannot be serious." "I am completely serious. Mason, we have known each other less than a week. You cannot possibly be suggesting what I think you are suggesting." "I am suggesting a marriage of convenience," Mason said quickly. "A business arrangement, if you will. You need a way out of this situation, and I need a reason to stay in one place for a while. We get along well. We could make it work." Adelaide turned away from him, gripping the edge of the counter. "You are asking me to marry you so I can escape Mrs. Thornton. That is insane." "Is it? You are working yourself to death here. I can see it, Adelaide. You are getting thinner, weaker. How much longer can you sustain this?" "Another month, 2, and then what happens when you collapse from exhaustion or malnutrition?" "That is not your concern," Adelaide said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Maybe it should be. Maybe we should look out for each other. Is that so terrible?" Adelaide turned back to face him, and there were tears in her eyes. "You do not understand what you are offering. Marriage is not something to enter into lightly, even a marriage of convenience. There are expectations, obligations. And what happens when you meet someone you actually want to marry? Someone you love? You would be trapped. What if I am willing to take that risk? But why? Why would you do this for someone you barely know?" Mason stepped closer, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her hazel eyes. "Because when I saw you give away your last piece of bread to those children, I saw something rare in this world. I saw goodness, pure and simple. I saw someone worth knowing, worth helping. And maybe that makes me a fool, but I have been called worse." Adelaide searched his face, looking for something, though he was not sure what. "This is madness," she whispered. "Perhaps. But is it any more mad than working yourself into an early grave for a woman who does not appreciate you? At least with this madness, you get a warm house, regular meals, and a partner who will treat you with respect. And what do you get out of it? Honestly, I am tired of drifting. I am 26 years old and I have nothing to show for it except some money in my pocket and a good horse. Maybe it is time I tried putting down roots, and if I am going to do that, I would rather do it with someone I actually like and respect." Adelaide laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. "This is the strangest proposal I could have ever imagined. Is that a yes?" "It is a maybe." "Give me tonight to think about it. This is not a decision to make while peeling carrots in Mrs. Thornton's kitchen." Mason nodded, accepting that. "Fair enough. But Adelaide, whatever you decide, I want you to know that if you say yes, I will do right by you. I will provide for you, protect you, and treat you with the respect you deserve. That is my promise." That night, Adelaide lay in her narrow bed in the tiny room she rented, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of the maelstrom of emotions swirling through her. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, to grab onto this lifeline that had been thrown to her. But another part, the cautious part that had been burned before, urged her to be careful, to think through all the implications. She had been alone for so long now, responsible only for herself. The thought of tying her life to someone else's, even in a business arrangement, was both terrifying and oddly appealing. Mason seemed like a good man, honest and kind. In the time she had known him, he had shown her nothing but respect and generosity. But was that enough to build a life on, even a practical one? And yet, what were her alternatives? She could continue as she was, working for Mrs. Thornton until her health gave out or until the woman decided she was more trouble than she was worth. She could try to find work elsewhere, but she had already exhausted most possibilities in Challies. She could leave town, strike out for somewhere new, but with what money? With what prospects? Adelaide had never been the kind of person to make rash decisions. Her father had often teased her about her careful, methodical approach to life. "You think so hard about every little thing you will think yourself right into paralysis," he used to say. But maybe this time, overthinking was not the answer. Maybe this time, she needed to take a leap of faith. The next morning, Adelaide found Mason in the dining room eating breakfast. She slid into the seat across from him, her decision made. "Yes," she said simply. Mason looked up from his eggs, hope and something like relief flooding his features. "Yes, yes, I will marry you. Or rather, I will enter into this arrangement with you, but I have conditions." "Name them." "First, we need to be clear about expectations. This is a business arrangement, at least to start. We respect each other's privacy and boundaries. Second, if either of us wants out, if this becomes untenable for any reason, we figure out a fair way to end it. And third, we are honest with each other always. No secrets, no lies. If this is going to work at all, we need trust." Mason extended his hand across the table. "Agreed, on all counts." Adelaide shook his hand, and the deal was struck. They were married 3 days later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Challies. The minister, Reverend Thompson, seemed puzzled by the hasty arrangement but asked no prying questions. Adelaide wore a simple blue dress that Mason had insisted on buying for her, along with new boots and a warm coat for the coming winter. Mrs. Thornton had been furious at losing her worker, but could say nothing against a woman getting married. The only witnesses were Mr. Patterson from the general store and his wife, a kindly woman named Ruth, who pressed a small Bible into Adelaide's hands as a wedding gift. "For luck and comfort," she said with a knowing smile. As they stood before Reverend Thompson and spoke their vows, Adelaide felt a strange mixture of emotions. This was not how she had imagined getting married when she was a young girl dreaming of romance and adventure. There was no passionate declaration of love, no sweeping romantic gesture beyond Mason's practical kindness. And yet, as she looked at the man beside her, at his serious gray eyes and strong, weathered hands, she felt something settle in her chest, a sense of rightness that surprised her. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Mason leaned down and kissed her cheek gently, a chaste touch that somehow felt more intimate than a passionate embrace might have. They met with the Hendersons that afternoon. The couple, both in their 60s, had weathered faces and warm smiles. Mr. Henderson was a tall, spare man with a snow-white beard, while his wife was round and cheerful, with sharp blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "So you are the young couple interested in managing the ranch," Mr. Henderson said, looking them over carefully. "You have ranching experience." "I do, sir," Mason replied. "I have been working cattle for 8 years now, done multiple drives from Texas to Montana and points between. I know horses, cattle, and general ranch work." "And you, Mrs. Garrett?" Mrs. Henderson asked Adelaide. The name still felt strange to Adelaide's ears, but she answered steadily. "I grew up on a small farm, madam. I know how to tend animals, keep a garden, preserve food, and manage a household. I am a hard worker, and I learn quickly." The Hendersons exchanged a glance, one of those wordless communications that came from decades of marriage. "The place is not large," Mr. Henderson said. "We have about 30 head of cattle, a dozen horses, chickens, a few pigs. The house is solid, 3 rooms plus a kitchen. We keep a vegetable garden and a small orchard. Most of the work in winter is just keeping everything alive and healthy. Come spring, there is calving, planting, general repairs from winter damage. We would pay $40 a month plus room, board, and a share of any profits from the sale of cattle or crops," Mrs. Henderson added. "We ask for a 1-year commitment to start. If it works out well, we can discuss a longer-term arrangement." Mason and Adelaide agreed without hesitation, and arrangements were made for them to move to the ranch the following week, giving the Hendersons time to show them the operations before they left for Boise. Those first days on the ranch were a revelation for both of them. The house was small but well built, with a main room that served as both kitchen and living space, a bedroom, a small storage room, and to Adelaide's relief, a second sleeping area in a loft above the main room. "I will take the loft," Mason said immediately when they arrived. "You should have the bedroom. Are you sure? The loft will be cold in winter. I have slept in far worse places. Besides, there is a good stove in the main room. I will be fine." They settled into a routine quickly. Mason would rise before dawn to tend the animals, check fences, and handle the heavier ranch work. Adelaide would prepare meals, tend the chickens, manage the household, and help with whatever other tasks needed doing. They worked well together, communicating easily and falling into a partnership that felt natural despite its unusual origins. The Hendersons spent 3 days showing them everything they needed to know: where the best grazing land was, which cattle were likely to cause trouble, how the irrigation system for the garden worked, where supplies were kept, how to deal with the occasionally temperamental well. Mrs. Henderson taught Adelaide her recipes for preserving vegetables and fruits, showed her the root cellar and how to manage their food stores to last through the winter. "You two seem well suited," Mrs. Henderson observed one afternoon as she and Adelaide were preparing dinner while the men worked outside. "How long have you been married?" "Not long," Adelaide admitted. "Just a few days, actually." Mrs. Henderson raised her eyebrows. Newly married, then? Well, the first year is always the hardest, they say. You are still learning each other, but I can see you work well together, and that is half the battle right there. After the Hendersons left for Boise, Adelaide and Mason found themselves truly alone together for the first time. That first evening, sitting at the table after dinner, an awkward silence fell between them. "This is strange, is it not?" Adelaide finally said, voicing what they were both thinking. "Yes," Mason admitted, "but not bad strange, just different. We are married, but we are not really married. We are partners, but we are not really partners. We are living together, but we are essentially strangers. Then perhaps we should remedy that last part at least. Let us stop being strangers." Mason pushed his plate aside and leaned forward. "Tell me something about yourself that I do not know." "Something real." Adelaide thought for a moment. "I wanted to be a writer when I was young. I used to write stories and poems, filled notebooks with them. When my father died and I lost the farm, I lost all those notebooks too. Sometimes I miss them more than the land itself. That must have been hard. It was like losing pieces of myself. What about you? What did you want to be before you became a cowboy?" Mason smiled, a slightly sad expression. "I wanted to be a doctor. My mother died when I was 15 from something that probably could have been treated if we had access to proper medical care. I thought if I could become a doctor, I could prevent that kind of loss for others. But medical school costs money, and I was the oldest of 4 children. I needed to work to help support my siblings. Where are they now? Your siblings?" "My 2 sisters are married, living in Texas. My younger brother works in a dry goods store in Austin. We write occasionally, but I have not seen them in 3 years." He stood and began clearing the dishes. "We should both write, I think. You should write your stories, and I should write to my family more often. Life is too short to let those things slip away." Over the following weeks, they settled into their new life. The work was hard but satisfying. Adelaide found herself taking pleasure in the simple rhythms of ranch life, so different from the drudgery of working for Mrs. Thornton. Here, she could see the results of her labor. When she collected eggs from the chickens she had carefully tended, when she harvested vegetables from the garden she had weeded and watered, when she prepared meals from food she had helped produce, she felt a sense of accomplishment and pride she had not experienced in a long time. Mason proved to be a steady, reliable partner. He was patient when explaining ranch tasks she was unfamiliar with, never condescending or dismissive. He asked her opinion on decisions about the ranch and actually listened to her suggestions. And true to his word, he was unfailingly respectful of her privacy and boundaries. But Adelaide found herself growing curious about him, wanting to know more about the man she had married. She noticed small things, like how he would sometimes stand at the fence in the evenings, staring out at the mountains with a faraway expression, or how he was gentle with the animals, talking to the horses in a low, soothing voice. She saw how he pushed himself hard, taking on the most difficult tasks without complaint, and how he would sometimes wince when he thought she was not looking, favoring his left shoulder in a way that suggested an old injury. One evening in late October, about a month after they had moved to the ranch, Adelaide was preparing dinner when she heard a crash from outside, followed by Mason cursing, something he rarely did. She rushed out to find him sitting on the ground near the barn, his face pale and his left arm held close to his body. "What happened?" she asked, kneeling beside him. "Stupid mistake," he said through gritted teeth. "Horse spooked and I was not paying attention, knocked me into the barn wall." "It is nothing. Let me see." Adelaide gently examined his shoulder and he gasped when she touched a particular spot. "This is not nothing. When did you hurt this shoulder before? How did you know it was an old injury?" I have seen you favoring it. Now answer the question. 3 years ago, during a stampede. Got caught under my horse when it went down. The shoulder has never been quite right since. Adelaide helped him up and into the house, settling him at the table. She retrieved some supplies from the storage room, including a tin of liniment Mrs. Henderson had left behind. Take off your shirt. Mason hesitated, and Adelaide felt her cheeks flush. I need to see the injury properly. I promise to maintain your modesty as much as possible. He complied, and Adelaide found herself momentarily distracted by the expanse of his chest and shoulders, the muscles built from years of hard work, the scars that spoke of a life lived outdoors and dangerously. She forced herself to focus on the task at hand, gently probing the injured shoulder until she had a sense of what was wrong. I think you have just aggravated the old injury. Some rest and this liniment should help. She applied the medicine with careful, gentle strokes, trying to ignore how warm his skin felt under her fingers, how she could feel his heartbeat quicken slightly at her touch. You have done this before, Mason observed, his voice slightly strained. My father injured himself regularly. I got good at patching him up. She finished applying the liniment and stepped back. You should rest that arm for a few days, no heavy lifting. Adelaide, I cannot rest. There is too much work to do. Then I will do it. I am stronger than I look, and you have put enough weight on me that I am not the half-starved waif you met in Challies. It was true. With regular meals and the physical work of the ranch, Adelaide had regained her health. Her cheeks had color now, her frame had filled out, and she moved with an energy she had not possessed in months. I will not have you overworking yourself on my account, Mason protested. And I will not have you crippling yourself because you are too stubborn to accept help. We are partners, remember? That means we support each other. Mason studied her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression, a softness that had not been there before. Yes, partners. The next few days forced them into an even closer partnership, as Adelaide took on more of the physical labor while Mason's shoulder healed. She was mucking out stalls, hauling water, and doing other tasks she had always left to him. Mason helped where he could with his good arm, and they worked side by side in a way that felt different, more intimate than before. One afternoon, as they were working together to repair a section of fence, Adelaide paused to wipe sweat from her forehead. Can I ask you something? Of course. Do you ever regret this? Marrying me, I mean. Tying yourself down to this life when you could have been free to go wherever you wanted. Mason set down the post he was holding and looked at her directly. Not for a single moment. Do you? No, Adelaide said, surprised to realize how true it was. I thought this might feel like just another kind of trap, but it does not. This feels like freedom in a way, like I am finally living instead of just surviving. I know what you mean. Mason picked up the post again, positioning it carefully. I spent so many years drifting, thinking that movement meant freedom. But there is a different kind of freedom in having a place to belong, someone to belong with. They finished the fence in companionable silence, but Adelaide found herself thinking about his words long after the work was done. When had this stopped being just a practical arrangement? When had she started looking forward to their meals together, to their evening conversations, to the sound of his boots on the floor in the morning? November brought the first real cold, and with it, a different set of challenges. Mason's shoulder had healed well, but now they had to prepare for winter in earnest. They cut and stacked firewood, insulated the barn, brought the cattle closer to the homestead where they could be more easily tended. Adelaide preserved the last of the garden vegetables and made sure their food stores were adequate. One evening, a blizzard blew in with frightening speed. Mason was out checking on the animals when the full force of the storm hit. Adelaide paced the house anxiously, peering out into the whiteout conditions, unable to see more than a few feet. When Mason finally stumbled through the door, covered in snow and shaking with cold, she rushed to help him. "The animals are secure," he managed through chattering teeth. "But we are in for a rough night." Adelaide helped him out of his frozen outer layers and wrapped him in blankets near the stove. She heated water for tea and soup, pressing the warm mug into his hands. "You should not have stayed out so long. You could have frozen to death." "Could not leave the animals unsheltered," Mason said, taking a sip of the hot tea. "They would not have survived. And if you had died out there, what good would that have done them or anyone?" He looked at her, surprised by the vehemence in her voice. "Adelaide, are you angry with me?" "I am terrified," she admitted, sitting down beside him. "When you did not come back, when I could not see anything through the storm, I thought something terrible had happened to you, and I realized that I could not bear it if something did. When did that happen? When did I start caring so much?" Mason set down his tea and took her hand, his fingers still cold despite the blankets. "I do not know when it happened for you, but I can tell you when it happened for me. It was the day you agreed to marry me, and I saw hope return to your eyes. Every day since then, watching you bloom and thrive, seeing your strength and kindness and spirit, I have fallen a little more in love with you." Adelaide's breath caught. Love. But this was supposed to be practical, a business arrangement. "I know what it was supposed to be. But the heart does not much care for supposed to, does it? I love you, Adelaide. I think I started loving you the moment I saw you give away your last bread, and I have not stopped since." Tears spilled down Adelaide's cheeks. "I do not know what to say. I have not let myself think about this about us in those terms. I was so afraid of hoping for something more than what we agreed to." "Then do not say anything. Not yet. Just think about it. And know that whatever you feel or do not feel, I am here. I am not going anywhere." The storm raged outside for 2 days, trapping them inside the house together. During those 2 days, something fundamental shifted between them. They talked for hours, sharing stories from their pasts, their fears and dreams and regrets. They played cards and read aloud from the few books they had. They cooked together, cleaned together, simply existed together in a way that felt both new and comfortable. On the second night, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Adelaide finally spoke the words that had been building inside her. "I think I am falling in love with you too. Or maybe I already have fallen and was just too scared to admit it." Mason turned to her, his gray eyes reflecting the firelight. "You do not have to be scared, not with me. I know. That is what makes it so frightening. I never expected this, any of this. I never expected to feel this way." Mason reached out and cupped her face gently. "May I kiss you? A real kiss, not the polite peck we shared at our wedding." Adelaide nodded, and Mason leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind. When his lips met hers, it was gentle at first, tentative, as if they were both afraid of breaking the spell. But then Adelaide responded, her arms coming up around his neck, and the kiss deepened, becoming something more passionate, more real. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Mason rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for weeks." "Only weeks," Adelaide teased, her voice shaky with emotion. "Possibly longer. Possibly since the moment I first saw you." That night, Adelaide made a decision. "I do not want to sleep separately anymore. We are married and we love each other, or at least we are working our way toward it. Come to bed with me, really with me." Mason searched her face. "Are you certain? I do not want you to feel pressured." "I am certain. I want this. I want you." They came together that night with a tenderness and passion that surprised them both. It was not just physical desire, though that was certainly present. It was a joining of two lonely souls who had found in each other something they had not even known they were searching for: a home, a partner, a love. The winter passed in a blur of hard work and growing love. They faced challenges together, from a bout of illness that swept through the cattle to a frozen pipe that flooded part of the barn, but they faced them as a true team, as true partners. The physical aspect of their marriage deepened their emotional connection, and Adelaide found herself amazed at how completely she had come to trust this man who had been a stranger just months before. They talked about the future, about what would happen when the year was up and the Hendersons returned. "I think we should ask to buy the ranch from them," Mason suggested one evening in January. "We have some money saved, and we could work out payments for the rest. You think they would sell?" Adelaide asked, hope and anxiety warring in her chest. "Only one way to find out. I will write to them this week." The response came faster than expected. The Hendersons were delighted with the idea. Their daughter in Boise was expecting her first child, and they had realized they wanted to be nearby to help with their grandchild. They proposed a fair price and reasonable terms, and by March, the ranch legally belonged to Mason and Adelaide Garrett. "We own land," Adelaide said in wonder, staring at the deed. "We actually own something." "We built something," Mason corrected, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Together." Spring brought new life to the ranch. The calves were born, healthy and strong. Adelaide planted an expanded garden with seeds she had ordered from a catalog, dreaming of vegetables and flowers. They hired a young man from town, a 19-year-old named Danny who wanted to learn ranching, to help with the heaviest work during the busy season. In May, Adelaide realized she had missed her monthly courses. When she confirmed with the doctor in town that she was indeed expecting a child, she was overwhelmed with joy and terror in equal measure. She told Mason that evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I am going to have a baby. We are going to have a baby." Mason's face transformed, wonder and delight spreading across his features. He lifted her up and spun her around gently. "When?" "The doctor thinks late October or early November, based on when we first came together." "A child," Mason said, setting her down carefully as if she were suddenly made of glass. "Our child. Adelaide, I have never been happier in my entire life." The pregnancy was not easy. Adelaide suffered from morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoon, and the summer heat made her feel constantly exhausted. But Mason was attentive and supportive, taking on extra work so she could rest, bringing her cold water and whatever foods she could tolerate, reading to her in the evenings when she was too tired to do anything else. "I feel useless," Adelaide complained one day in July when even the effort of feeding the chickens had left her dizzy and nauseated. "You are growing our child," Mason said firmly. "That is the most important work there is. Everything else can wait or be handled by someone else." By August, the morning sickness had finally eased, and Adelaide's energy returned somewhat. Her belly was growing noticeably now, and she caught Mason looking at it with such tenderness and awe that it made her heart swell. One evening, as they lay in bed, Adelaide guided Mason's hand to her stomach. "Wait, just there. Do you feel it?" Mason's eyes widened as he felt the flutter of movement under his palm. "Is that the baby moving?" Adelaide laughed at his expression of pure wonder. "Strong little thing, just like their father. Or stubborn like their mother," Mason countered, leaning down to speak to her belly. "You hear that in there? You have got quite the legacy to live up to. Your mother is the strongest, bravest person I know." As fall approached, they made preparations for the baby's arrival. Mason built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it smooth and carving delicate designs into the headboard. Adelaide sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her stitches careful and even. They converted the small storage room into a nursery, painting it a soft yellow and adding a rocking chair that Mason found at an estate sale in town. The Hendersons came to visit in September, wanting to see the ranch and meet the young couple who had made such a success of it. Mrs. Henderson was delighted about the baby and gave Adelaide all sorts of advice, some useful, some contradictory, all well-meaning. "You have done well here," Mr. Henderson said to Mason as they surveyed the property. "Better than we ever did, truth be told. The place looks better than it has in years." "We love it here," Mason replied. "This is home now for us and for our children." "Children, plural, you are planning ahead," Mason smiled. "If we are blessed with more, yes." Adelaide was an only child, and so was I in a sense, since my siblings are all much younger. We both want a house full of children if we can manage it. Adelaide went into labor on a cold night in early November. The doctor was summoned from town, along with Mrs. Patterson, who had attended many births and offered to help. The labor was long and difficult, stretching through the night and into the next day. Mason stayed close, holding Adelaide's hand, wiping her forehead, offering water and encouragement. "I cannot do this," Adelaide gasped at one point, exhausted and in pain. "Yes, you can," Mason said firmly. "You are the strongest person I know. You can do anything." Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, their son was born, squalling and red-faced and perfect. The doctor checked him over and pronounced him healthy, placing the baby in Adelaide's arms. "He is beautiful," Adelaide whispered, tears streaming down her face as she looked at the tiny life they had created. Mason, sitting beside her on the bed, wrapped his arm around them both, his own eyes wet. "He is perfect. You are perfect. I love you so much, Adelaide." They named him Matthew Henderson Garrett, honoring both Mason's initial and the Hendersons who had given them their start. Little Matthew was a good baby, healthy and alert, with his mother's hazel eyes and what promised to be his father's dark hair. The early weeks were exhausting but joyful. Mason took on even more of the ranch work so Adelaide could focus on recovering and caring for Matthew. They took turns walking the floor with him at night when he fussed, both of them bleary-eyed but happy. "How is it possible to love someone this much when we have only known them a few weeks?" Adelaide marveled one night as she nursed Matthew. "I asked myself the same question about you once," Mason replied, watching them both with an expression of such love that it took Adelaide's breath away. As Matthew grew from an infant to a curious, active baby, the ranch continued to thrive. They added more cattle, improved the irrigation system, expanded the garden. Mason's reputation as a fair and skilled rancher grew, and other homesteaders in the area began coming to him for advice. Adelaide, when she had time between caring for Matthew and managing the household, began writing again, filling notebook after notebook with stories and observations about life on the ranch. When Matthew was 2 years old, Adelaide discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and in the summer of 1886, they welcomed a daughter, Anna Marie. She was smaller than Matthew had been but just as healthy, with her father's gray eyes and a head full of blonde curls. "Our family is complete," Adelaide said, holding Anna while Matthew toddled around the room, chattering to his new sister in his own special language. "Is it?" Mason asked with a smile. "I seem to recall someone saying they wanted a house full of children." "Well, maybe not complete yet," Adelaide conceded, "but we have a good start." Over the next few years, they added 2 more children to their family. A second son, Marcus, was born in 1888, followed by another daughter, Abigail, in 1890. The house that had once seemed adequately sized now burst at the seams with the energy and noise of 4 young children. "We need to expand," Mason said one evening after they had finally gotten all the children to bed. "The house or the family?" Adelaide teased. "Definitely the house. The family is perfect as it is." They added 2 more rooms to the house, giving the children proper bedrooms and creating a small study where Adelaide could write and Mason could manage the ranch's business affairs. The ranch continued to grow and prosper, and they were able to hire additional help, making the workload more manageable. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1892, they took a rare day off from ranch duties. They arranged for the children to stay with the Pattersons in town, and they rode out to a high meadow where wildflowers bloomed in profusion. "You remember the day we met?" Adelaide asked as they sat on a blanket, enjoying the peace and the view. "Every detail," Mason replied. "You were giving away your last piece of bread to those children. You looked so tired, so thin, but also so determined to survive. I never could have imagined then that 10 years later I would be here, with you, with our children, with this life. If someone had told me, I would not have believed them. You ever miss it? The other life you might have had, teaching, writing without interruption, having time to yourself?" Adelaide considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss the idea of it, the freedom and independence. But I would not trade this life for anything. You gave me so much more than just food and shelter when you made sure I never went hungry again. You gave me hope, love, a family, a home. You gave me everything." Mason leaned over and kissed her, a long, deep kiss that still made her heart race after all these years. "You gave me just as much. Before you, I was drifting, lost. You gave me purpose, direction, a reason to put down roots. You gave me love I did not even know I was capable of feeling." They made love there in the meadow, under the wide Idaho sky, with the same passion and tenderness they had shared on their first night together. As they rode back to the ranch in the golden light of late afternoon, Adelaide felt a profound sense of contentment. Her life had not turned out anything like she had planned. She had lost so much, her father, her home, her original dreams. But in losing everything, she had found something far better. The years continued to pass, each bringing its own challenges and triumphs. There were hard winters and drought summers, sick animals and broken equipment, childhood illnesses and near accidents. But there were also first steps and first words, school pageants and birthday celebrations, quiet evenings by the fire and lively Sunday dinners. Matthew grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the ranch and spent every free moment following his father around, learning everything he could about ranching. Anna was creative and adventurous, always building something or exploring somewhere she probably should not. Marcus had his mother's gentle nature and love of stories, often begging her to read to him or tell him tales of her own invention. And Abigail, the baby, was pure sunshine, laughing and singing her way through each day. "We did good," Mason said one evening when the children were all in bed, and they sat on the porch in their rocking chairs, watching the stars come out. "We did," Adelaide agreed, reaching over to take his hand. "We built something real and lasting here. Not just the ranch, but this family, this love. It will outlast us both." "Are you getting maudlin on me?" Mason teased gently. "Just grateful. So very grateful for that day in Challies when a cowboy saw a woman feeding strangers with her last bread and decided to do something about it." "Best decision I ever made," Mason said simply. As the children grew older, the ranch became a family operation in truth. Matthew took on more responsibilities, managing the cattle with a skill that rivaled his father's. Anna, despite being a girl, insisted on learning everything her brother did, proving herself just as capable. Marcus helped his mother with the garden and the household accounts, his careful nature perfectly suited to detailed work. And Abigail, still young but eager to help, fed the chickens and collected eggs with the seriousness of someone doing the most important job in the world. Adelaide had continued her writing over the years, and eventually, she began submitting stories to magazines and periodicals. Her tales of life in the Idaho Territory, as it was until it became a state in 1890, found an appreciative audience. She earned a modest income from her writing, money she saved toward the children's futures. "You are a published author," Mason said proudly when her first story was accepted. "I always knew you had it in you." "It is just a small magazine," Adelaide demurred, but she was glowing with pride. "Today a small magazine, tomorrow the whole country will know your name." It did not quite work out that way, but Adelaide did develop a following. Her stories, honest and heartfelt tales of frontier life, resonated with readers who were hungry for authentic voices from the West. She never became famous, but she became respected, and that was enough. In 1895, when Matthew was nearly 13 and already tall and strong, a neighboring rancher approached Mason with a proposition. His own son had taken sick with consumption and had gone to a sanitarium in the East, leaving him without help. Would Mason be willing to lease some of his land, help manage a combined herd? Mason discussed it with Adelaide and Matthew, treating his son as a partner in the decision. Together, they decided it was a good opportunity. The arrangement proved profitable for everyone involved, and it gave Matthew valuable experience in the business side of ranching. As the new century approached, the family gathered around the table one Sunday after church. They had become regular attendees over the years, and Adelaide served on the church committee while Mason helped maintain the building. "It is hard to believe it is almost 1900, Adelaide said, looking around at her family. "When I think about where we were 18 years ago, where I was, it seems like a different lifetime." "Tell us the story again, Ma," Anna begged. "About how you and Pa met." It had become a family tradition, the telling of how Mason and Adelaide came together. The children never tired of hearing it, though the details never changed. "Well," Adelaide began, settling into her chair with baby Abigail, now 10 years old, curled up beside her. "It was November of 1882, and I was at the lowest point of my life. I had lost everything, my father, my home, my hope. I was working for a terrible woman and barely surviving. One day, I gave my last piece of bread to 2 hungry children, not knowing that a cowboy was watching." Mason picked up the story, describing how he had seen Adelaide's kindness and been moved by it, how he had invited her to dinner, and then made his outrageous proposal. The children listened with rapt attention, even though they had heard it all before. "And then Ma said yes, and you got married and lived happily ever after," Abigail finished, sighing contentedly. "Not quite happily ever after yet," Mason said with a smile. "We are still in the middle of our story." "The best parts are still ahead," Adelaide added, looking at her husband with all the love that had only grown deeper over the years. The children groaned good-naturedly at their parents' obvious affection for each other, but Adelaide and Mason just laughed. They had built their love on a foundation of mutual respect and partnership, and it had proven strong enough to weather any storm. As the years continued to pass, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Matthew eventually married a sweet girl from town named Sarah, and they built a house on the far end of the ranch property. They gave Mason and Adelaide their first grandchildren, twin boys born in 1902. Anna, true to her independent nature, went to the state normal school and became a teacher, though she returned to Challies to teach and lived at home until she married a deputy sheriff in 1905. Marcus discovered a talent for veterinary medicine and apprenticed with the town doctor before going to veterinary school in Boise. And Abigail, the baby, showed signs of becoming a writer like her mother, always scribbling in notebooks and making up elaborate stories. In 1907, on their 25th wedding anniversary, Mason and Adelaide renewed their vows in front of their children, grandchildren, and the community they had become an integral part of. Reverend Thompson, now elderly but still serving the church, presided over the ceremony. 25 years ago, I married you two in a simple ceremony with almost no one present, he said with a smile. I wondered then if this hasty marriage would last, but I have watched you two build a life together based on mutual respect, genuine love, and shared values. You have shown this community what a true partnership looks like, and you have raised 4 fine children who are a credit to you both. As they stood before their family and friends, Mason took Adelaide's hands just as he had 25 years before. But this time, when he spoke his vows, they were not the rote words of a business arrangement but a heartfelt declaration of love tested and proven by time. Adelaide, you have been my partner, my friend, my love, and the mother of my children. You have made my life richer and fuller than I ever imagined possible. I promise to continue to love you, cherish you, and stand by you for all the years we have remaining. Adelaide, tears streaming down her face, spoke her own vows. Mason, you saved my life in more ways than one. You gave me not just food and shelter, but hope and love and a family. You made me believe in happiness again. I promise to love you with all my heart for the rest of my days. The celebration that followed was joyous and loud, with music and dancing and far too much food. Adelaide looked around at the gathered crowd, at her children and grandchildren, at the neighbors and friends who had become like family, and felt overwhelming gratitude for the life she had been given. Late that night, after everyone had gone and the house was quiet, Mason and Adelaide sat on their porch, watching the stars just as they had done countless times before. You ever think about that day? Adelaide asked. The day you saw me with the children. All the time, Mason admitted. I think about how easily I could have walked past, could have minded my own business. My whole life would be different if I had. Mine too. I do not like to think about where I would be now if you had not stopped to help. You would have survived, Mason said confidently. You are the strongest person I know. You would have found a way. Maybe. But I am so glad I did not have to find out. I am so glad you saw me that day and that you cared enough to do something about it. I saw you feeding strangers with your last bread, Mason said, pulling her close. And I made sure you never went hungry again. Best decision I ever made. They sat in comfortable silence, holding each other under the stars, two people who had taken a chance on each other and built something beautiful and lasting. The ranch continued to thrive under the combined efforts of Mason, Adelaide, and Matthew. They had weathered economic downturns and good years, droughts and floods, and through it all, they had persevered. The Garrett Ranch had become one of the most successful and respected operations in the area, known not just for their quality cattle and horses, but for the integrity and fairness with which they conducted business. As Mason and Adelaide entered their 50s, they began to step back from the day-to-day operations, allowing Matthew and Sarah to take on more responsibility. It was a gradual transition, natural and unforced, as the younger generation proved themselves more than capable of carrying on the legacy. In 1912, on a crisp autumn day 30 years after they had first met, Mason and Adelaide took a ride out to the high meadow where they had celebrated their 10th anniversary. It had become a tradition over the years, this annual pilgrimage to the place that held such special meaning for them. 30 years, Adelaide marveled as they dismounted and spread out their blanket. Sometimes it feels like just yesterday, and sometimes it feels like we have always been together. I know what you mean, Mason said, settling down beside her. His hair was now more silver than dark, and there were deep lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But to Adelaide, he was just as handsome as the day she met him, perhaps more so because of all the love and history they shared. You have any regrets? Adelaide asked, a question she had never asked before. Mason considered it carefully. I regret that I cannot do the physical work I used to do. I regret that my father never got to meet you or his grandchildren. But about our life together, about the choices we made, not a single regret. You. I regret the years before I met you, the time I wasted on people and things that did not matter. But I cannot regret them too much, because they led me to that day in Challies, to you seeing me and deciding I was worth saving. You were always worth saving, Mason said firmly. I just recognized it. They spent the afternoon in their meadow, talking about their children and grandchildren, making plans for the future, and reminiscing about the past. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, they packed up their blanket and prepared to head home. Thank you, Adelaide said suddenly. For what? For everything. For seeing me, for helping me, for loving me, for giving me this life. Mason cupped her face gently, his weathered hands tender against her skin. Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for taking a chance on a cowboy with a crazy plan. Thank you for being my partner in every sense of the word. They kissed as the sun set behind them, two people who had built a love story for the ages out of a single act of kindness and a leap of faith. The years continued to pass, bringing new joys and new sorrows. They lost Reverend Thompson in 1913, a man who had been a spiritual guide and friend. Mrs. Patterson passed in 1915, and Adelaide mourned the loss of the woman who had been kind to her from the beginning. But there were also weddings to celebrate as Marcus married, and Abigail found love with a newspaper editor from Boise. More grandchildren arrived, and eventually great-grandchildren, filling the ranch house with multiple generations on holidays and special occasions. The Garrett Ranch became a gathering place, a center of family and community where everyone was welcome and no one went hungry. In 1920, as America emerged from the Great War and entered a new decade, Mason and Adelaide celebrated their 38th wedding anniversary quietly at home. Both were in their 60s now, slowing down but still active and engaged with life. We have had a good run, Mason said that evening as they sat on their porch, a ritual that had remained constant through all the years. We are not finished yet, Adelaide protested. We have plenty of good years ahead. I hope so. But even if we did not, I would still count myself the luckiest man alive. I got to spend my life with you, Adelaide. I got to love you and be loved by you. What more could any man ask for? Adelaide leaned her head on his shoulder, fitting perfectly into the space that seemed made for her. I love you, Mason Garrett. I have loved you since that first real kiss during the blizzard, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you, Adelaide Garrett. You made me believe in miracles, in second chances, in the power of kindness and love. You gave me everything I never knew I needed. They sat together as night fell, watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast Idaho sky, two souls who had found each other against all odds and built a love that would endure long after they were gone. Mason passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1925, just a few months after his 69th birthday. Adelaide held his hand as he took his last breath, whispering her love into his ear until the very end. The entire community turned out for his funeral, a testament to the respect and affection he had earned over his decades in Challies. Adelaide grieved deeply, but not bitterly. She had been blessed with 43 years with the man who had saved her life and given her everything she held dear. She continued to live on the ranch, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, writing her stories and tending her garden until her own health began to fail in 1928. On a warm summer evening, with all her children gathered around her bed, Adelaide drew her last breath. Her final words were a smile and a whisper. "I see him. Mason is waiting for me." They buried her beside Mason in the Challies cemetery, under a simple headstone that read, "Adelaide Norton Garrett, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She fed others even when hungry herself." The ranch remained in the Garrett family for generations, each one learning the story of how it all began. How a cowboy saw a woman feeding strangers with her last bread and made sure she never went hungry again. It became a family legend, a reminder of the power of kindness, the importance of compassion, and the way love can transform lives. The house that Mason and Adelaide built together still stood decades later, expanded and modernized but still fundamentally the same. The meadow where they celebrated their anniversaries became a family gathering spot, a place where Garretts came to remember their roots and the love story that started it all.